My largest ant colony has escaped and is swarming my ant room. We have to fix this immediately. I have no idea what I was in for. Stick around to see what happens. Enjoy the video. There were ants everywhere. They were supposed to be contained in their tank and nest, but clearly something had gone horribly wrong. This was a complete disaster. It was impossible to estimate how many there were. They had so many places to hide. By the time I'd counted 10 of them, the first one would have already vanished into a corner. I have several other ant colonies nearby, and they wouldn't stand a chance if these ants, Tetramobicarinatum, decided to attack. I tried to assess the scale of a breakout and even found them in the cockroach enclosure next to the tank, where they were feasting on the roaches. But that wasn't all. I followed a trail of ants and found the bridge they were using to get to a second table. I found even more of them there. I had left some equipment on the table that I hadn't put away yet, and the ants had completely swarmed it. In a way, this was a blessing in disguise. At least they weren't gathering somewhere else where I couldn't see them. But I couldn't afford to hesitate, as more and more ants were finding the trail. They would swarm out and wouldn't be satisfied. And this whole time I had no clue where they were even escaping from. I needed a plan of attack. And fast. I assessed the situation, thought it over, and finally settled on a plan. First, I had to cut off the main escape route. If no scouts can return to the nest, the information that there's a world to explore wouldn't spread. Luckily, I have an emergency container ready for exactly this type of incident. Catching the individual ants was not easy, and it felt like a never-ending task. More and more ants kept appearing from every nook and cranny. As soon as I cleared one area and turned my attention elsewhere, the first spot would be crawling with ants again. I felt like I sat there for an eternity, but I was determined to catch every last one. I also carefully checked each ant to see if any of them were queens. If queens had escaped, it would have been a code red emergency. With a bit of bad luck, a queen could colonize a flower pot, for example, and in a few weeks I would have multiple colonies running loose in my apartment. I had to be meticulous, so I was incredibly relieved to find no queens among the escapees. So far, so good. This is the result. If you feel like it, you can pause the video and count them. But I was just glad to be done with that part so I could focus on the real problem. I still didn't know where they were coming from. That was the next difficult step. Somewhere there had to be a hole, a gap, or a crack the ants were exploiting. A few were still crawling out from under the lid. If I didn't act now, they would flood my room all over again. I removed the lid and the swarm was instantly back. It was also impossible to ignore the nest, which was filled to the breaking point. You couldn't even see inside it anymore. Luckily, these ants are slow, but unluckily, they are tiny and nimble. There was no way I could let them all escape. It didn't take long to find the breakout spot. Worker ants were constantly squeezing through this tiny gap. Despite the crisis, I couldn't help but watch, fascinated and a little bit impressed. When I thought about the fact that all of these ants could theoretically leave the nest, my heart started pounding. I scanned the edges for more holes. There were a few scary moments, but thankfully it was just one breach. You might also notice the aluminum foil scattered around. Unfortunately, I've been having issues with this nest for a while, though it's never been this bad. As you can see, the ants created a gap between the glass and the nest body. Over time, the substrate filled in the cracks. The ants also intentionally wedged sand between the plastic and glass, creating a bigger and bigger gap. One grain of sand doesn't do much, but thousands of ants working on it every day can achieve a lot. But what does it look like inside the main tank? Are there any ants left? The answer was a definite yes. The colony had never been this big, and the nest had never been this messy. It's getting harder and harder to clean the tank. The ants hadn't just conquered the outside world, they had conquered the entire tank, including the lid. They made short work of the escape barrier. The barrier also doesn't stick well to the silicone strips in the corners, and the ants quickly find ways to get over it. This makes it extremely difficult to open the tank without ants getting out. Something had to be done urgently. The nest was failing, and the tank couldn't contain them. As we are watching, more and more ants are breaking out, and this has to stop. For good. Now, watch this. Pretty satisfying to peel off that film, right? It is being discussed that ants can see red light, and this red film belongs to something new. This is a modular nest from Home for Ants, and hopefully the colony's future home. It has multiple chambers designed to mimic a natural ant nest. I chose the white design to make the red ants stand out. The small openings allow moisture to enter the nest without letting the ants escape. I can add water to the hydration chamber below and use cotton to help retain moisture. There are several ports for tubing, and the tunnels and the frame are perfect for inserting a heating cable to warm the nest for heat-loving species, or in the winter when it's cold. What I find especially brilliant are the gates, which allow you to open up more and more space for the ants step by step. If a nest is too large, ants will often use empty chambers as garbage dump. This can be problematic and, in the worst case, dangerous for the colony. To prevent this, you only open a new section when the ants truly need the space. This way, you can buy a large nest and house a small colony in it, letting them grow into it over time. There was no time to hesitate, but I was nervous. Connecting a new nest is always tricky because you have to be fast yet careful and gentle. I didn't want any more ants to escape, which meant I had to open the tank lid again. The moment I opened it, the lid was covered, but luckily I've practiced this. I quickly sealed the other openings with ventilation grills. This was it. The first ants would be exploring soon. I quickly closed the two gates so only one section of a new nest was accessible and waited. Less than 2 minutes later, the first explorers were in the tube. I immediately slid the heating cable into the new nest to lure them in with warmth. This would make the new nest warmer than the old one, and I hoped it would encourage them to move instead of continuing to escape. The first ant found the nest and would surely carry the news back to the colony. From there on, I was hopefully on the slow road out of this crisis. All these ants had to move through the tank and into the new home. Oh my. At least the first ants were in the new nest instead of on the table. Now it was time to hope and pray. I covered the nest to make it dark and hoped for the best. One day later, and I'm excited to see the progress. You can already see a difference, but we'll take it step by step. I'm shining a bright light on the old nest because ants don't like that, and you can see the effect immediately. A closer look inside reveals a massive difference. You can finally see real movement in the old nest again. You can also see heaps of winged ants. Those are young queens and males. They are going to become a huge problem later, but I don't want to go ahead of myself. Here in the nest, you can see the ants that have retreated to the back wall, bringing brood, larvae and eggs with them. There were still a ton of ants in the old nest. The situation was no longer a code red, but it was definitely still a code orange. How was I going to get the rest of them out of here? The connecting tube was much emptier, but the main tank was still bustling with activity. It was, after all, the only place they could get food and water. A look at the tube leading to the new nest was promising, and I was excited to see what I'd find inside. I was not disappointed. A phenomenal amount had happened here. So many ants everywhere. It was mesmerizing to watch them crawling on the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. And it was fascinating how they had perfectly occupied the one open quadrant. Let's take a closer look. Of course, the ants are a bit agitated now. I've just uncovered them from the darkness. But look at these incredible shots. It looks like a few hundred drops of caramel. And not only that, we have a fantastic view of a brood the colony has already moved into the new nest. That means the nest has been officially accepted. Interestingly, you can see exactly where the heating cable is making it a bit too warm for them as they are keeping their distance. I can probably tweak the temperature a bit. The ants have also built a small dirt pile, but that's not a big deal. If that's how they want it, that's fine. Now is a good time to open another quadrant and give the ants more space. The first section is full, so now they can conquer the next one. It's so fascinating to open the gate when the ants are already waiting right behind it. They begin exploring immediately. Since they accepted the first section so readily, I'm optimistic they'll claim the second one just as quickly. So far, I'm really pleased with how this is going. Another day has passed and I've propped the old nest up for better light exposure. So, what does it look like inside? It's practically empty. Well, not completely empty, but very empty. I haven't seen the nest this clear in ages. Being able to see straight from the front to the back feels strange. Like looking back at an apartment you've just moved out of. There's still a small pocket of a colony in this corner. I expected a few stubborn holdouts, but this is much more manageable than I thought. The tube is a bit fuller and the tank is, of course, still active. But the interesting part is the new nest. What could it look like inside? I put some extra cardboard on the top to avoid spoilers, but now look at this. I never expected such a sharp division. You can clearly see where the ants feel comfortable and where they don't. And their new comfort zone is in the second quadrant. It's amazing that they can choose the exact temperature they prefer. The entire nest is a hive of activity. When you look at the ants, it's already difficult to see the floor. The chaotic movement is a complete whirlwind, and I already find it hard to track a single ant. You can even see them bustling about through the ventilation slits. This nest is giving us some truly unique insights into their lives. We'll never fully understand what it's like to be them, but we can still observe. Meanwhile, a lot had happened in the tank. The ants were still very active, and the problem of them taking over the lid had gotten even worse. Working in here would be a real nightmare, but seeing ants like this one crawling on the outside means you have to deal with it to prevent more escapes. The ants were after all still able to break out. In the old nest, a few ants became more active and I knew I had to do something. They weren't going to move on their own, and frankly, I couldn't wait to finally put the situation behind me. I was also curious about what was in the upper part of the old nest. We have no view into it at all, only seeing an occasional ant here and there. It could be nothing, or it could be Pandora's box. It was time. I quickly lifted the lid and saw just how many ants were on it. I hastily applied a temporary escape barrier to the rim to give myself a small buffer before they stormed out. My heart was pounding as I quickly picked the ants off the lid. But things were about to get much worse. First, the hard part. The old nest had to be disconnected, and ants were everywhere in and around the connection port. I had to move fast. The ants were very interested in my fingers, but I had little interest in having stinging ants on my hands. What you can't see here is that the cotton plug I had ready was way too big. I was panicking so much that I didn't even realize the main tank was still open. I finally jammed some cotton in to prevent the worst. That was done. But now, what? I couldn't leave it like this. While I thought about it, I collected the escape piece and steeled myself. I had to do the exact same thing again, but this time with the old nest itself. Terrified and with trembling fingers, I started removing it. The fact that the adapter was stuck didn't help either. I could hardly believe it when it finally came loose. I was immediately overwhelmed again, but handled it better this time. Looking into the tube of ants was cool, and you could see them tumble out as I gently tapped it. Some were holding on tight, so I decided to leave the tube in the tank for now, allowing them to find their own way to the new nest. The next hurdle was already waiting. How do we get these ants out of here? There were way more than I expected, but there was no sense in delaying. I carefully started loosening the clips holding the glass plate on the nest. Soon, only my thumb was keeping it in place. If I let it go, all the ants would be free to pour out at once. First, I removed the film to buy some time. That went faster than I hoped, and now I really had to do it. Or so I thought. The gaps that had now appeared at the edges let so many ants through that I was solely occupied with preventing them from escaping. In a way, I was okay with that, and was systematically reducing their numbers. A blessing in disguise again. But then, the moment of truth. I took a deep breath and did it. I was anxious to see what would happen. The ants were instantly agitated and I had to be quick. They streamed out to the left and right, but I was nimble and well practiced by now. What felt like an eternity later, I was done. I dared to use a soft brush to sweep the rest into the tank. The mysterious upper section turned out to be not so mysterious after all. It had tunnels and chambers, but it was basically just solid substrate. The last few ants were quickly tapped into the tank, which is where we'll look now. This is the current state. Old nest gone, new one attached. And now for the final challenge, the old tank. This is a lot of ants. And with the new materials like the tube, it looks even more unpleasant than before. I guess that's how it is with renovations. The ants were ready to swarm the second I opened the lid, and I don't even want to know how many were on my hands. I cannot wait to get rid of this tank. And for that, I have a plan that is both good and absolutely dreadful. It's dreadful because of something you can already see. The queens and males are swarming. It's a nuptial flight. Hundreds, maybe thousands of winged ants were desperately trying to get as high as possible so they could fly off and mate. This could have not have happened at a worse time. The small buffer of escape barrier was long gone. If I opened the lid now, my entire room would be full of ants again. Flying ants. That was the absolute last thing I needed. Just look at the floor of a tank and all the winged ants. It's practically a carpet of wings, and I was about to lose my mind. I wanted to get the ants out of this disgusting tank as quickly as possible. We desperately needed a new one, but how could I manage it? I couldn't touch anything in there without grabbing 100 ants. I had a massive problem. The new nest was still full, and without the old nest, it was even more crowded. There were ants and eggs everywhere, and the gate system was holding up perfectly. And then it hit me. The perfect idea. Or so I thought at the time. Here is the wonderful new tank. Clean, simple, and almost white as snow. Clean corners and removable ventilation covers for easy access if all else fails. Overall, a beautiful, deeper tank, and the plan is to connect it to the new nest. This was going to be tense again, because the ants were sitting right at the opening. So, for what felt like the 10th time in a few days, I was less than thrilled about the prospect of having stinging ants crawling on me. Then I remembered I hadn't applied the escape barrier yet. I'm trying paraffin oil this time because it looks cleaner and I'm hoping it will last longer. However, I've never tested it on this species, so we will see how it goes. Okay, back to connecting the nest and my complete lack of a delicate touch. It somehow worked out and the new tank was connected quickly. Of course, the ants didn't waste any time. They were in an uproar. And this is the setup now. Old tank on the left, new tank on the right, difference like night and day. But something was still missing. To make the new tank truly attractive, I had to do one more thing. time to bite the bullet and get it over with. No hesitation, I moved both the water feeder and the sugar water into the new tank. If the ants wanted to drink, they would have to move. And of course, it went terribly. Every time I wiped one ant back into the tank, 9 others had already crawled out somewhere else. After try, after try, after try, it just wasn't working. So I gave it one more try and finally it was done. Opening the lid was a serious challenge. The second it was back on, the ants swarmed upwards again, and I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going. But first, the new tank. It already had a few ants from the transfer, and the opening of the tube was like a gateway to another dimension. The ants poured out of the tube like a liquid, and thankfully they found the water feeders very quickly. At least they wouldn't dehydrate. It was especially cool to see how the ants contrasted against the clean floor and how clearly we could observe them. But here too, the same problem arose. The queens and males streamed directly to the top. You can even see the exact line where the escape barrier starts. But the new tank needs to be even more attractive. So let's give them a delicious cockroach. To do that, we have to reach inside, which we can now do thanks to the working escape barrier. That's a huge relief. It was astonishing how quickly the new tank filled with ants. The cockroach was discovered as if it had been in the old tank. Word of the cockroach would spread soon, and the hope was that the rest of the colony would follow. Of course, this puts more stress on the escape barrier, and I wasn't so sure it would hold. The first few ants were already reaching the lid. The view inside the connecting tube, however, is fascinating. We now have unique perspectives into the nest and the highway between their worlds. This would make a great screensaver. The ants had already started processing the cockroach, which was a good moment to turn on the time-lapse and see how things develop. And the time-lapse was cool, but what happened next was worse than expected. The water feeders were a huge hit and the cockroach remained popular. Interestingly, a group of the ants stationed themselves in front of a ventilation grill and, unfortunately, on the lid. The escape barrier was no match for the full force of a colony. That's not good. The exact problem we had before was now happening again in the new tank, all because of a massive nuptial flight. This is a problem, and to understand the scale of it, you have to look at the old tank. It's even worse here. If you are wondering why they are all in the left corner, it's because there's a window in that direction and they're probably instinctively drawn to the light of the sun. I could complain about this forever, but it wouldn't help. First, let's disconnect the old tank. We have to see this through. The ants deserve a proper home. Luckily, I have some practice with this now and it went relatively smoothly. Next, we need courage. Nerves of steel and my emergency container again. Its edges are coated with an escape barrier, so nothing should be able to crawl out. Now the lid had to come off. My heart immediately started racing. Countless ants stormed the rim of the tank, heading in all directions. I had to act fast, pushing them all back in and quickly reapplying a temporary talcum powder barrier, hoping it would hold for a moment. Then it began. First tapping out the tube, a second time because they hadn't all moved out. Then the tank connector, then the water feeder, and finally the food dish. Then the most grueling part. It was time to get every single ant out of this tank. I put on a nice audiobook for this because the whole process took an hour and a half. I was truly on the verge of losing it, but I was so thankful that the barrier was keeping the ants contained. It's incredible how many ants can fit into such a small space and all the places they can hide. While emptying it, I was struck by how much waste had accumulated. A grisly collection of tiny legs and antennae scattered everywhere. I'm so glad to be leaving this behind. And just look at this. It's hypnotic. You can see the ants raining down from the edges. The talcum powder definitely seems to work much better on these species. And check this out. With one little tap, they were all gathered on the floor. You can see the countless wings again. Only now you can grasp the sheer scale of a swarm. But the tank was finally clean. The waste was piled up in a mountain of shame. An ant tank should never look like this, and I hope I can manage things better with a new setup. However, there was still that other problem. More and more ants were pouring into the new tank, and it was becoming a challenge there too. And we still had the ants on the ceiling. We have to solve this problem as well. This time I'm using a cotton ball dipped in talcum. Opening the lid was still awful. I really thought I was past this, and now I have the same problem all over again. So focus on the escape barrier and try to manage. Once that was done, I had a moment to get the ants off the lid. You can see them running all over my arm. The tank was now in an even wilder state of chaos. Not a single corner was free of ants. They were everywhere, doing everything. A hopeless, tangled mess. Thankfully, the escape barrier was holding, but it wouldn't hold forever, so I'm going to fix it permanently. And this crowd isn't even all of them. We have so many more in the nest. A mass of ants like this also has interesting properties. Above a certain density, they start to behave like a fluid. It's super fascinating, and you could watch it for ages. But you have to remember, these are living beings. Then, with a little pour, they were all in the tank in one big chaotic heap. From this point on, it's utter madness. I've never seen anything like this. What's happening here is absolutely insane. Left, right, up, down. Ants are everywhere. It almost looks like TV static. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I'll probably never experience something like this again. But we can't forget that all these ants are still trying to swarm up and out. So, time to tackle the final problem. I mixed some talcum powder with water until it formed a thick, creamy paste. I carefully applied a thick coat of it around the entire top rim of the tank. This thick layer should last for a good long while, and if it wears down, I can easily reapply it. You can see it's not working at all right now, but once it's dry, it will be perfect. And with that, we are almost at the end. The ants are continuing to care for their brood, carrying it to wherever it will develop best. The ants in the tank will gradually move into the nest, which means we can open the third quadrant. As expected, they flooded right into the new section. With as many ants as we have, this was no surprise. This is the current state, and this is what it looks like the next day. The talcum mixture is dry, and it's successfully keeping the ants off the rim. There is still a stray ant on the lid here and there, but it's nothing compared to before. If I roughen up the barrier surface a little so it's less solid, it will work even better. All the problems were finally solved. The ants were secure again. Tank is in turmoil, but the ants are sorting themselves out. It's unavoidable that some ants die during a move like this. For example, if I grip them too hard with the tweezers, but all things considered, the move was a success. Even the cockroach is now just a hollow shell. Time for 2 new cockroaches to help them regain their strength. A final look into the nest confirms the total success. The ants have occupied all the available quadrants, and I already have plans for how we are going to fill up the final one.